Randy, it is always good to be talking to you. Share with everybody what you've been up to recently.
Well, thanks for having me back on the show, Andy. I've actually just been stuck in what I call the book well, where all I'm doing is writing a book and I have almost no bandwidth for anything else. This October, the month of recording in, is pretty busy. I have a lot of booked upcoming speaking engagements and martial arts seminars, but most of what I've been doing is dealing with personal stuff and trying to get this book finished because writing a book is hard, as you know.
Yes, it is. Can you tell us a little bit about the book now, or is it all a secret?
Nope, nothing's a secret anymore. It should be out, although with AI out there, maybe somebody could beat me to finishing the book with the title. But the title is called The Timeline of Self-Defense.
Ooh,
And the right? I thought, thank
oh,
you.
that's a great title.
The whole purpose of the book is literally going over everything that I show. So ideally, it is a sample platter of everything I teach. So it's going to go through all of the phases of a self-protection, self-defense encounter outside of the physical response. So we're going to go over situation awareness, how predators select people, why they're selected. We're going to go over boundaries and all that kind of stuff, plus the aftermath of violence and what to do if you've been in that situation. So book starts with some background education, and then we go through the timeline of a self-defense encounter.
Very cool. I'm excited about that. I definitely want to read that. I know Jason Brick will also want to read that. So that is awesome.
Yes.
That's two sales right there, man. Two sales.
All right. Killing it so far. I'll take it.
You've been on the show now, I think 3 or 4 times, and I don't
Yeah.
remember if I've ever asked you this before, but what set you on your journey to being a self-defense instructor? What's your Batman origin story?
Sure. That I wish it was Batman. That'd be cooler. So honestly, like I think, and it's poignant for what we're going to be talking about on today's episode, but I came into self-defense and martial arts because of bullying and because I lived in a house where violence was pretty common. And so I always attribute my like starting phase to the Power Rangers, and this is going to be dated for some of the listeners, but I watched the Power Rangers religiously after I came home from school every day. And this is like first generation Power Rangers. And I noticed that the Power Rangers didn't get bullied, they didn't get picked on. And I was like, well, if I learn how to jumping back kick, that's going to be the thing that stops all of these horrific things from happening that are going on in my life right now. And so I did everything I could. I begged and pleaded to my grandparents to get me into martial arts. And then that's kind of where it started. What switched the gears from, are you hearing those dings?
No.
Okay, good. What switched me from like pure martial arts, that's where I started, right? Everybody does. Every reality-based instructor has a gi in their closet. They all do. And so what switched me from just pure martial arts was a couple of things. Number one was injuries. I have post-concussion syndrome and a bunch of injuries from being hit in the head from years of bouncing. Being stabbed kind of switched me around on that a little bit to kind of looking at different aspects of violence. And I think that was the biggest shift. So I went from martial arts to reality based because just the environment that I was in. But everything is because of the Power Rangers. That's why we're talking on this show right now.
Very good, because of the Power Rangers.
Yes.
I remember you talking about, getting stabbed and what that was like for you. But in that
Yeah.
immediate moment, you didn't realize that had actually happened, right?
No, no. And very, very common if you've talked to anybody who's been in a weapons encounter because adrenaline is so powerful. If you've been stabbed or shot, a lot of people don't even recognize that happened. They don't even know because like when you're training in a gym, and I'm not trying to say that, mixed martial arts isn't cool or whatever, but
Sure.
when you're training in a gym, your level of adrenalization is controlled. So when you feel a punch, like, oh, that's okay. And then when you leave, you tend to feel more hurt. It's even more intense when it's in a real life situation. You get an even bigger adrenaline dump. So like a stab feels like a punch, a shot feels like you got kicked. Like it's very interesting what the body will do to help you survive those situations. So yeah, that was a big aha moment. Is nobody told me that I wouldn't see the weapon or I wouldn't even know I was stabbed. You think like, oh, you're definitely going to know you were stabbed, but myself and 100 people I've talked to have experienced the same kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy, and that's a great explanation of that too. By the way, I followed all of that. So, what we want to talk about today, and this is the first time I've ever talked about this on the show, and I was like,
Oh,
I've got to wait. I want Randy to be on the show to talk to me about this. We're
thank
going
you.
to talk about domestic violence and also what is known as intimate partner violence.
Yes.
And these two things kind of overlap, but they're also two separate things. Can you kind of give us an overview of what they are?
Yeah, 100%. So I think there is some overlap in it, and the overlap exists because most of the data is surrounding intimate partner violence. But let's do a quick definition. Domestic violence involves anybody who exists or location. So that can be children, that can be elderly, that can be brothers and sisters, anybody. And usually domestic violence is isolated to one location, so a house. Intimate partner violence is always some kind of lover. There's always some kind of romantic involvement, but it can happen anywhere. It's not usually based upon one site. So domestic violence, anybody in the family can experience it. It's usually in the same house. Intimate partner violence is where we talk about stalking and that sort of stuff. And that's going to come up with some sort of emotional relationship, but it doesn't have to occur in the same location.
Got it. Okay, and that makes sense because
Yeah.
I as I read this, I realized that children can be the victims of domestic violence, an entire family can't, as you just explained.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
the whole romantic side of it makes
Mhm.
this a much more personal threat, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it depends on the lens you're looking through, right? So I lived in a house where there was both interpersonal violence and there was domestic violence, right? So my mother had a bad choice in men, so they would abuse her, and then of course it would trickle down to us. So it's they're definitely not separate entities, they're very interwoven, but I think that the majority of the conversation is around like dating, right?
Hmm.
Because it's harder to talk about, and we're going to today, but it's harder to talk about leaving a domestic situation than it is leaving a bad partner. And they're
Right.
two totally separate things.
Exactly. Exactly. So I have always appreciated your work on boundaries. And I think that is a phenomenal thing that people don't really know about as much as they should. So
Right.
when it comes to domestic violence and intimate partner violence, what sort of boundaries do we see that get violated that people can kind of see, wait a minute, this is more than I think it is?
Sure. So I think it's important to kind of establish what kind of boundaries that I talk about. So there's so many different types of boundaries can be violated. So I separate them into 6/7 different columns, right? So we have physical boundaries, which is how you interact with space. There are sexual boundaries, which is goes both with touching and with how you talk about sex in general. Then we have material boundaries, which are all of the things that people take from, let's say, for example, somebody's using you for your bank account. They're just not going to work, they're living, right?
Right.
Then we have intellectual/spiritual boundaries. And this is where I've added, as you know, Andy, I'm more of a secular person. So I count intellectual boundaries as anything you think, right? So your political views, your religion, etc. But I do now add a caveat for spiritual boundaries. If you are a more spiritual person, there is a separate chunk of things where religious leaders can take advantage, or spiritual leaders, etc. Right?
Right.
Can take advantage. Then we have emotional boundaries, which are how you feel about certain situations. And then last but not least is your time boundaries and what people can do. And when we talk about interpersonal violence and we talk about domestic violence, all of these boundaries can be violated, right?
Yeah.
So and that's what makes this so hard is a lot of instructors, a lot of groups are really focusing on sexual and physical, and they're not realizing that people can be overpressured or they can be scared into a place. And so while it looks like things are getting better, it's not that things are getting better, it's that abusers are shifting their
Hmm.
focus. I use
Hmm.
the example for hashtag Me Too. Hashtag Me Too did a great job of beating and removing all of the existing predators. But the new predators now have just switched to a new skill set that won't get detected by Me Too. So we have to
Right.
look at all 6/7 of these areas in order to get a full picture of domestic violence in general.
Right. And so when you're talking about all these different boundaries that can be crossed and can be violated,
Yeah.
it's even if you cross only one, even if
Yeah.
just one is crossed, it's still domestic violence. It's still this type of violence. It's not just like, oh, he doesn't, appreciate my time, or yeah, he's just using me for my bank account.
Right.
It's once you cross one, it's like crossing all of them, right?
Yeah, well, yes and no. It's because boundaries are very personal, so it's up to you to decide. Like, maybe you have a deadbeat brother and you lend him money. You're like, whatever, I lend him money. So just because he's violated a boundary doesn't necessarily mean something bad is happening.
Sure.
Also, we have to understand that not all boundaries are healthy, right? I'm
Mm,
sure. I'm sure. Maybe you. I know. I definitely have. Some of your listeners have probably said things like, "I'm never going to date again." That's an unhealthy boundary, right?
right.
So you have to look at it as a whole, but definitely that would be in kind of the red flag section where if they are starting to push these boundaries, especially very soon in a relationship, we should be paying more attention to what's going on.
That's good. Yeah. When things start, when things are starting and
Yeah.
they don't go well, they're not going to get better, right?
Yeah, and I think like I have a saying now because I've run a couple businesses, and my new the saying that I'm living off of is hire slow, fire fast.
Mm,
And I think the same thing applies to dating and to all that stuff, which is, take your time, go slow, and then the second something happens, get rid of that person. There's a reason why jobs can release you after 3 months with no question. That should be with relationships too, right? Because anybody can fake it for like 28 days, but 3 months in, you're going to get a real sample of who this person is.
yeah, that's a good point. And why didn't you tell me that a long time ago, bud? I could have.
why didn't
I
Why didn't
know.
I tell me that a long time ago?
Well, a minute ago, you talked about red flags. And so
Yeah.
while I know that every relationship is different, every household
Mhm.
is different, what are some common red flags that we can look for to indicate that this might be a domestic violence kind of situation?
Sure. Let's use the model of those boundaries that I talked about, and we can kind of walk out where those pop in. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So, number one, the first thing I want you to pay attention to is for time. If the person is trying to hurry the relationship up, like they're trying
Mm,
to speed it up past the point that you feel uncomfortable, right? They want to move in very quickly. They want to join bank accounts really quickly. They want you to move really quickly outside your comfort zone. That is a huge red flag. And I think that's the number one thing that people should be paying attention to is the natural life cycle of a relationship and if that's being sped up because
yeah.
the only reason somebody would speed that up is because they're looking to gain something quicker and they don't have the patience to wait for it. So
Mm,
that's a big one.
right.
When we look at the physical and sexual, we're going to combine them for this red flag talk. Any people are going to push your boundaries. You have to accept that, right? Like everybody thinks the boundaries are like this, like force field. Like you set it and you forget it and it's done. That's just not life. You're still gonna miss
Right.
parking spots. You're still gonna get yelled at in line, right? That's still gonna happen. But if your partner is on purpose pushing those boundaries, especially if you have made them very clear and you've expressed them, because boundaries cannot be implied, you have to say them. If you've said those things and they're still pushing past or they don't believe you, that's a bad sign. Because if they're already discounting your no's and your boundaries and your limits
Mm,
in the beginning, it's not going to get better as they go along, right? And predators in all facets of self-defense are always pushing boundaries and testing limits. When they're interviewing, they're trying to see what they can get away with, right? Are you the potential? Are you the right kind of victim I'm looking for?
right.
And they're going to use the dating to figure that out, right? So let's say you say you don't like fish, and then
Hmm.
your second date's a sushi restaurant. Like that's a red flag. They're
Hmm.
not listening to you. They're not paying attention, right? And they're going to push this. They're going to see, will you allow me to get away with this, or will you not? And so, looking at those things, both physically and sexually, you should really be paying attention to those things.
Yeah.
A lot of people they discover their boundary violations when it's already happening, right? So like,
Right.
oh,
Sure.
I don't like that. I didn't know I didn't like that. If we can sit down and look at these 6 areas and be like, okay, how do I like to be touched? How do I like to be talked to? If you have that preparation, that proactive, as I call it, proactive skills, then when somebody does violate your boundary, you can check them quicker and then you'll get a better understanding of who that person is.
Yeah.
Right, because they might have took you for sushi because they're like, oh my god, I totally forgot. I was trying to impress you. And you're like, oh, that's an honest mistake. Or they could be like, well, you can order whatever you want. I like sushi. And you're like, well, this is a second date. That's super weird. So context plays a huge part.
Right.
Intelligence, intellect boundaries / spiritual boundaries. If they're squishing you, if they're trying to control you or put their own ethics or values on you, and we're seeing a lot of this in the post-COVID world we live in, where everything's feels even more polarized than it has been. Like people are trying to force their ethics and their beliefs on other people. That's a red flag. right? This
Mhm.
should be a collaboration. It shouldn't be one person dominantly in charge. Emotional, if they're playing too many games, and this I'm a victim of this. I thought that playing hard to get, that meant the girl liked me, right? So I could go harder, but that's just not the case nowadays. Especially if you're single, you're in a different world than I lived in. I didn't play on the apps or whatever's going on.
Right, right.
Then last is time boundaries, and a really big red flag for time is when a person makes you their everything, right? So they're like, oh, I
Hmm.
need you or I'll get mad, or I need you or I'll get sad, or I need this and that. And they're monopolizing all of your time. So these are some common red flags, kind of go over one more time, is if they're pushing any of your boundaries hard, they're not paying attention or listening, if they are monopolizing too much time or trying to jump skip the relationship. All of these should be, again, they're not deal breakers, but they should
Right,
be things that make you pay more attention,
right.
right? Like you could be totally comfortable and then they'll say something off and, ooh, maybe I should be paying more attention. That's kind of what we're looking for right here.
Right. And just one of those things, by itself is just one of those things, but multiple together, that can be a really a big
Yeah,
sign that things are not going to go well continuing in that relationship.
exactly. I really like the language in Left of Bang, which is look for clusters of behavior around 3 or more, right? Maybe the person's just like, so I have a big time boundary. I grew up in the generation of there's no such thing as on time. You're either early or you're late. Those are your
Right.
options.
Yeah.
So for me, my time boundaries are very, you would have seen that today as I was late for this podcast, but normally my boundaries are very hard on that, right? So if the person is just discounting that immediately, I need to reevaluate this whole relationship.
Right. So I'll ask you something about one of the things that I see a lot, especially in
Yeah.
dealing with parents and children, and that is verbal abuse. A
Yeah.
lot of people are really quick to dismiss verbal abuse because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, he's not hitting her or he's not molesting her. So he's just being mean. Where does
Yeah.
verbal abuse fall in this?
So I put that under your intellectual boundaries. And I really like the saying of it takes 6 weeks to heal a bone. It could take a lifetime to heal a brain.
Mm,
So with when it looks like it, so physical abuse, just like physical injury, it's visible, right?
hmm.
It's tangible. We can quantify it. You cannot quantify emotional abuse. You cannot quantify verbal abuse because you don't know what psychological damage that's doing. But those scars run deeper. And that's
Yeah.
why the therapy is such a booming business, right? Is that, yeah, sure, you didn't get twisted up and hurt, but they said something horrible to you. And the difference between a physical injury and a mental injury or an emotional injury is the timetable on a physical injury.
Mm,
Oh, I'm going to be down for 7-8 weeks. No problem. I've broken almost every bone. 6 to 8 weeks is normal, right? When you go to an emotional injury, you don't know. And you don't even know if you experienced the injury. And then that alone becomes a problem. So I have 3 pillars when it comes to my self-defense method or whatever we're calling it, right? Which is number one is personal value. You have to believe that you are worth defending.
mm,
If you live in an environment where everybody says you're dumb or stupid or whatever, they're verbally abusing you, you're not going to have the keystone thing to move through your life. The amount of people I've talked to who have been in horrific situations in self-defense, what I've asked them, the inevitable question of why didn't you fight back or whatever, not victim blame, but why didn't that happen?
right.
The amount of people that said, "Oh, I'm not worth defending," or "Why would I do anything?" or "Who says that?" Like that's it's insane, Andy, and it's
Oh,
very
yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
It's hard for people to wrap their heads around. But this is why I do what I do. Like,
Hmm.
not every answer is a rear naked choke. Not every answer is do more burpees. There's other things. There's so many other factors when it comes to self protection, and so if they're in a place of mental abuse, verbal abuse, which affects them mentally, they are not going to grow up believing they're worth anything, and you're actually making that person more vulnerable to it's almost predator grooming for
Mm,
predators in the future because
yeah.
they don't have that self-confidence to be like, no, they're not going to force a boundary if they don't believe they're worth it, right? So I honestly, hate speech and all that stuff has been a red flag for me ever since I was bouncing. We realized that when people start using, I'm going to say hate speech kind of as a general term. I don't
Sure.
mean just racism. I mean any kind of
Right.
ism, right? Sexism, slut shaming, all that kind of stuff. When I was bouncing, we wouldn't even let people argue over sports teams in the bar because it always escalated to violence every single time.
Uh-huh.
Because you got your two options, right? You have your social violence, you have your predatory violence. Social violence, hate speech amps you up to do more violence to somebody else. So if I start making you not like me, right? Oh, Andy, you're blah. We're very similar. We got beards, we're white guys, but like,
Yeah.
hey, Andy, like you live in a different country than me. All Americans are this. It starts to get me going, right?
Hmm.
Which might put me in a place of being able to do a higher level of violence. When it comes to predatory violence, because the predator always sees you as something else already, it's just used to control and keep you in your place. So
Mm.
language to me is very, very important. Self-talk to yourself, number one, right? Because
Yeah.
you're probably meaner
Yeah.
to you than anybody else. But number two is how other people talk to you. That's gonna, even if you think you're tougher than it, you're still gonna absorb some of that, and it's going to affect you going forward. So I really think, I'm not saying one is worse than the other because everybody has
Hmm.
their own experiences,
Sure.
but I'll tell you right now, I would rather fight one steroid user, juice monkey, than 3 high school mean girls any day of the week. Because they'll crush me emotionally,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah, then
Yeah.
they'll beat me up. I'll be like, am I that fat? Am I, well, should my hair? Well, I don't like
Oh,
it, right?
should I do my hair different? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's yeah. And you explained that really well, and you made me laugh at the end of it, man. So very well done in
Thank you.
explaining that. For those of us who may have concerns about family or friends that might be
Yeah.
being abused, what are some of the cues that we need to look for to understand that this person might need help?
I would say number one, trust your gut instinct. You probably know your family better than some random dude on a podcast giving you advice, right? I'll give you some tips, obviously, but if you truly feel like something is wrong, it probably something is wrong. On that note, though, you want to be paying attention to like a lot of the same things you'd look for in any kind of situational awareness, right? Are they wearing clothes that are off season of the weather, right? Maybe hiding
Hmm.
potential bruises, right? That's a big one people don't really notice. Oh, I'm just cold, and women get away saying they're cold all the time, right? Uh,
Right.
but but like that's one of the things that you should be paying attention to. It's 30 degrees. Oh, sorry, I'm in Canada. It's 80 degrees, 90 degrees, and you're in like a full sweater. That's kind of weird, right? Like what's going on?
Hmm.
You want to pay attention to the habits of the partner as well. What people forget is that abusers don't just groom their victims, they also groom the people around them. They groom your
Hmm.
family, they groom your friends, right? So I've had multiple clients whose abuser, the family loved them because the abuser knows, right? If I can isolate this person, if I can get them away from their support structure, community is one of my major pillars in self-protection, then I have more control. So no, they're not only grooming the victim, right?
Hmm.
They're also grooming their work friends, their family, everybody. They're performing for everyone so they can continue to victimize as long as possible. So just pay attention if that, if the person's like a little bit mean to your friend, but also like way too nice, like, like that's kind of
Hmm.
strange,
Hmm.
right? Pay attention to anger outbursts. And when I say anger outbursts, outbursts is the wrong word. Pay attention to rises in controlled rage. A lot of
Hmm.
abusers like to say things like, she just makes me so mad, or he just makes me so mad because I love them so much. And I just have an anger problem. If you had an anger problem, that would occur at work, that would occur on the
Hmm.
street, and you'd probably be in jail. I find it very interesting how these abusers have all this rage when they're with their partners, but at work they're totally fine. At
Right.
Thanksgiving they're totally fine,
Yeah.
right? So you want to be paying attention to that. You also want to be paying attention to just the way they talk to them, because there's a lot of subtext in the way you address somebody, right? So we always joke, our love language in my family is bullying. So we all bully each other lovingly. That's our love language. But it's done equal to equal, right? Like everybody can make fun of everybody. Nobody's a sacred cow. Nobody can't get touched in this. If it's a one-way direction of he or she can critique them, but they can't do it the other way, and you notice that, that's a huge red flag as well. That means there's some
Right.
control issues going on.
Right. Yeah. It's who people can't insult, who they can't talk about. And that tells you who has the control in the
Yeah,
relationship. I've heard that before. That's,
exactly.
yep, very well explained there. Um, so, okay, you alluded to this earlier, and I think this is a
Yeah,
very important question that I think people need to understand, if people who haven't been in abusive situations.
right.
If there is somebody who is in an abusive relationship, why don't they just leave?
This is such a loaded question, and I'm glad we're talking about it. Uh, because of so many other factors, right? I'll base it down to more of like a bro self defense situation. All the people that say just run from a self defense situation, they're not thinking about the fact that like the odds of you being able to run are much less than you being able to fight back. right? You
Hmm.
could be injured, whatever. But also, the joke I like to make is, okay, somebody comes at me with a knife, it's me and my daughter. I can't be like, ninja move, and then run and be like, you got this, right, daughter? And then just leave,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So there's so many factors of why they're probably not leaving. But the two major ones are usually financial support because the person is taking that away, and also the emotional damage they've taken. They honestly don't believe they deserve better. It's the grooming. The purpose of the grooming is to put them in a place where they would never even think about leaving.
Hmm.
Right? It's to show them like if you just let's not to be too like on the nose satirical, like if you could just make these eggs right, if you could just listen to me right, then everything will be fine. And it goes into this cycle that the human brain actually really enjoys. Human brain likes routine. And
Yes. Yes, it does.
right. And so if there's like a bad part and then a kiss and make up part, as long as those are relatively far apart, they might not feel like it's they might feel like they could change it, and they might feel like they don't need to leave. There's also factors of dependence, right? Maybe they can't leave because they have children there, or the person has threatened the children. It's such a, how do I put it? It's a very narrow viewed, naive, just leave answer, right? It's
Yeah.
what drives me
Yeah.
crazy about when I see anytime I see marketing for a martial arts class that says, domestic abuse course, like how to defend it. If you're not planning on leaving and you learn how to fight, all you've done is escalated the violence, because the person in control is not going to be like, oh, six sidekick, guess we're equals now, right? They're going to escalate to whatever they need to get that control back. So just leaving is hard. People have trouble going to the gym, Andy. They have trouble walking to a gym because it's uncomfortable. Could you imagine leaving your family, your life, your kids, right? It's so much stuff to think about. It's why it's so multi-layered. And that's why predators do it in the sequence they do it in, right? They'll isolate you. They'll make you financially dependent. They'll talk you down. They'll put you in a place, and they'll grind you down into a spot where you just don't believe either correctly or incorrectly that you can leave, right? Because
Hmm.
especially if let's say the abuser is the biological father of your children,
Yeah.
they still have rights and power, right? They still have
Right.
things. So like just leave it's almost impossible in a situation like this sometimes, unless you have the access like a witness protection like environment where you
Yeah.
can just be removed from the city and the person's not going to come back. So when you look at the numbers, the amount of people that are killed by intimate partners is exponentially higher than almost anything else. When you look at stalking cases, sexual assault, all these things come from people that know the person ahead of time.
Yeah.
So just leave is short-sighted. They have to have the resources to leave, but not only that, they have to have the confidence that if they get out, they can stay out. And giving that is very, very hard. And it definitely doesn't happen in a 3-hour martial arts seminar.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's a huge decision that somebody has to make. It's a very brave decision that somebody makes.
It
Um,
is. It's yeah, and a thing, right, is like humans can put up with a lot, and so like there is no, you can't put a moral value on leaving or staying. You can't, because you're not in their shoes. You don't know what they're living through. You don't know what they're putting up with. You don't know what they're managing, and you don't know what else is going. I know people that are in horrible relationships that are just like, as soon as I finish school or as soon as I finish, yeah, right, and they're making these calculated decisions for their survival, because the one place you should feel safe is at home, and they don't even have that.
yeah.
Right. So to be like, well, just go out on your own. They're like, well, okay, I'll just like
Uh,
throw everything away. It's a hard conversation.
yeah, it's a very hard, and it's very, different with each individual and how that situation goes and where they
Yes.
are and family support and all that. Yeah. So it's a big thing.
And
Um,
that's why earlier is better. That's why this detection stuff, this proactive stuff, the
sure.
quicker you can catch them, the easier it is to leave. The longer you stay in it, the harder it is. Just simple as that, right?
Right.
We've had people that we've worked with who have left people for like 15 years. They've been in the relationship with them and like, oh my God, this isn't what I was, right, what I was looking for. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, talking about some of the people that you have worked with, is there a
yeah.
story from a survivor that you would like to share with us? I don't know if that's appropriate for me to ask. I'm hoping to
Sure.
find a good positive story that people can
Yeah.
find some strength from.
Yeah, and so all the stories I tell, I have permission to tell them. So I definitely
Okay,
have a
good.
story ready for
Good.
this. I remember, so I have a boundary setting course, cheap plug, I guess, online course where we go over this stuff. And one of my clients had taken this course and actually used it as in the testimonials for the course. She'd taken the course, she realized her boundaries were not sufficient. There was holes in them, right? Because just because you have like, so for example, I have great time boundaries, but my material boundaries suck. right? As an entrepreneur, I had to learn those time boundaries. So you might be strong in one. You can be very physically strong boundaries, but maybe sexual stuff throws you off. So you have to have strength in all the different areas and resiliency. So she had realized that, oh my God, this relationship that I'm in is not what I was looking for. This is not what I wanted. And then she started to set boundaries when she was engaged to this person. Ended up having to break the engagement off because the person wouldn't adjust or shift. Luckily, she got up before they were married, because leaving when married is much, much harder.
Oh yeah.
And then she now is in a much more loving, more healthy relationship where she met somebody, established her boundaries ahead of time, and now things are going very well. We've had people go the other way too, where I had someone take my boundary setting course. 15 years into a marriage, she started shifting her boundaries. Her husband's like, whoa, 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 what's going on here? And they ended up working it out. So you can tell, like, boundaries to me are a litmus test on people, right? If you're not going to respect my boundary to quick single serving encounter, how would I ever expect you to respect those in the long term, right? So we've seen both sides of it, where somebody has learned their boundaries and then left, and we've seen it also where they've learned their boundaries and then the relationship survived. So I think it's so beneficial to look, because the woman in the 15-year marriage that stayed, she didn't feel like she was being abused, but she definitely felt like her boundaries were being walked on, because that's how she always believed how a woman should be. And then her husband was like, whoa, what's everything changing for? Because people like change, right? Like routine.
Sure.
What's changing? Why is this happening? And they fix it up. But yeah, I think the most powerful one of those stories I have is the woman who was about to get married, went through the course, learned about this, like, oh my God, that happens. Oh my God, this happens. Oh my God, this happens. Confronted the person, because you don't have to just leave. It could be just an error, right?
Sure.
And the longer you're with somebody, the harder it's going to be for them to change their habits in talking to you. But she realized this person wasn't willing to change. This is the relationship they wanted. He had selected her for these traits. And she's like, ooh, I don't like that at all. And she got out luckily before the marriage happened.
Well, very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody here is listening and they are in an abusive relationship, or somebody that they know, what is the best course of action to help a person?
So like any other huge life event, the person has to want to be helped. Like that's the number one rule, right? If you think you're gonna walk in with your white knight shining armor on your horse and take them away from what's going on, you're gonna be in trouble. Domestic violence calls are some of the most dangerous calls police go on.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the police start arresting the offender, and then the partner's like, don't touch my husband or wife, and they attack the police, right?
Yes.
It's a crazy dynamic. But what you could do as an outsider looking in, because that was the first question, right? And then insider looking out. Outsider looking in is just pay attention and listen to what they're going through. Don't try to fix it. Don't just listen. Just listen. And they will probably come to the realization on their own, ideally, or you can nudge them in that direction. And then when they do, you have to be like, okay, you don't ask for a timeline. Don't be like, you have to leave them right now. Like, let them figure out the next best steps, because, like, are they going to need to transition to a domestic abuse shelter? Are they going to need to, start sneakily getting a second cell phone and a credit card? And then, right, like, you don't know. We don't know what happens behind closed doors. So you don't know how interconnected these two people are. But if the person is abusive and it's purposefully abusive, right, it's the two types we talk about are like the reactive abuser and then the purposeful abuser. If they're a reactive abuser, it should be easier to leave. On the purposeful abuser, they've set up the whole life to make sure you're stuck there, right? They're going to take bank accounts, they're going to monitor stuff, they're going to have tracking apps on your phone. There's going to be malware. There's going to be things there's going to be an error tag on your car, right? There's just so many things that you have to look for when it comes to domestic violence. And then, unfortunately, leaving isn't the end. You have to see this person again in court, right? You have to see this person again if you have kids. You have to see this person again to get your stuff. And so they have to have they have to be ready to be done and believe that being done is the best solution. That's what has to happen there. So just really just listen and ask and ask questions and be helpful and do what you can, but don't think that like you're gonna fix it. It's just that's not how it works, unfortunately, because you just don't know how interconnected everybody is.
Right. That's wise. That's wise. So Randy, man, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this. I really do appreciate it. Where can people find out more about you online?
Honestly, just Randy King Live. Type that into Google, you'll find me there. Everything's on our website. So website redesign is happening here the next month. Soft launch for the company, because we changed stuff and scaled and whatever, the 80/20 brand is going to be January. So just, jump on, get an email in there, pay attention to what's happening. We have a lot of really, really cool stuff coming up that took me way longer to facilitate than I thought it was going to, because we're doing such a big, massive vision and project. So yeah, that's where you get me. And if you're looking for more stuff like this, patreon.com/Randy King Live is where extras for my podcast, Self-Defense from All Angles, is, and just kind of talks and conversations. We do a series called Where Predators Hide. We talk about how predators hide within like bureaucracies, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're into that kind of stuff, just join me kind of anywhere. Just Randy King Live, type it in Google, you'll find me.
Very cool. And for everybody listening, if this is the first time you've ever heard Randy on the show, he's been on the show 2 or 3 other times. I always love talking to him. He has a great perspective, very intelligent, can make you laugh at a subject like this and make you understand it. So, man, God bless you. I appreciate you, buddy.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy, for having me on the show. As always, I greatly appreciate it.